Hey, everybody, my name is John DePietro, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the world premiere interview of the book that is tearing it up on Amazon. And it's called 40 Years with the Legend, My Life with Kenny Rogers by Chuck Jacobs. Chuck, welcome to a story about you and your book and your life with Kenny.
Well, thank you, John. We've been friends for a long time, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to have a little visit regarding this book. It's pretty amazing that what I found most amazing was that I published it last Saturday and people were receiving it in the mail by Tuesday.
Well, Chuck, you know what? It's interesting that you say that because people don't realize the time that it took to write this book. In reality, people say, oh, how long did it take you to write the book? The answer is over 40 years.
Well, that's true.
Right?
You know, I wish I would have kept a journal, that's for sure. It would have made it a lot easier, less taxing on my memory to try to remember so many things.
Yeah.
But I really started it in about 2017. I sat down with Kenny backstage one time when one of the rare occasions when we were in the dressing room, just the two of us. And you know, through the years, we didn't have that many times that we were alone and could chat, but we did have some. And this was one time, and I told him, I said, you know, I'm getting ready to write a book about the time that I spent with you throughout my life, which was half of my life at that time, over half my life. And he responded with, "That's great." He said, "I think that's terrific. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." And you know, I had written a book earlier called The Bottom Line, and he actually wrote the foreword for that book. That was a base instruction book.
Yeah.
In '84, and so he was always willing to help. And but stupid me, I didn't get it done before before he could add his help.
His help.
But
You
he
know
did.
what?
It was good. You know.
We should go back just a bit and explain who you are and what you did with Kenny Rogers, because it says bassist, but you know, a lot of people don't know what a bassist is. But let's go back, Chuck. Let's just turn the clock back, where you're from and what you did with Kenny. Then I'll go back into more detailed questions about how you got to work with Kenny. But what did you do on stage? And but where are you from beforehand? Because everybody thinks that country music people either came from Texas or Nashville. Not the case with you at all.
That's very true. You know, Nashville has become and became and has become a mecca for musicians and artists generally. And it's amazing how many rock albums come out of Nashville, for instance, not just country. So I grew up in northern Michigan, and that was in a town called Traverse City. A small town before that was called Bel Air, about 300-400 people. But Traverse City was the big city. It had about 20,000,
Oh,
which is
big one, the big city. Okay.
yeah, when you say think big. But by comparison to 300-400 people, it was big. And that's when I first started getting into music, and was in a group in Michigan called the Rainmakers. Traveled throughout the state and in the Midwest, had some album, or not album, but 45s released and some success there. That developed into just getting on the road and traveling around with various different groups. I'll cover a lot of that in the book. And in one of those groups, a fella named Edgar Struble was with me in that group in the 73, 74 range. He moved to Nashville after we left that group. He moved to Nashville. I moved to New York City, and I was playing a jazz trio there. And when Edgar met up with the Kenny Rogers guys, the band, and joined that group, then they would come to town, like New York area, he'd invite me out to the show, and if I wasn't working, my wife and I would go.
Yeah.
And that's how I sort of developed the relationship with the guys and Kenny.
Okay. So let me stop you there for 1 second, because and I'll go right into this question right now. Kenny heard you play one night, but he heard it through a hotel wall.
That's right.
Give me the background of that. Kenny heard you play through a hotel wall at 1, 2 in the morning.
Yeah, in New Jersey, you're right. As I referenced, the Kenny band, Kenny would come up and play concerts in the Northeast area, in LA or New York area. And one time they were playing at the racetrack in New Jersey. And my wife and I went to the show, and I met up, I had met the guys in the band before. And this time I brought my bass with me. And Randy, who I became one of my closest friends in the group, was a great jazz player, jazz guitar player, and still is. And so he and I sort of hit it off because I was playing jazz trio. And so he said, "Why don't you come back to the hotel and we'll just sort of sit around in the hotel for a while? And you got your bass with you?" I said, "Yeah, maybe we can jam a little bit." And that's what you sort of do, you know? So I had a little amplifier, not big, it wasn't really loud, but when you do jazz, it's not that loud necessarily. So he and I sat in that room, and a few of the other guys, there were guys from the Dottie West group that hung out in the room there, and a couple of guys from the Kenny band. We had sort of a party going, and Randy and I were playing jazz songs into the wee hours of the night. And come to find out, we didn't know this, but come to find out, Kenny was in the room next door. And he really wasn't too thrilled when there was a lot of noise going on and couldn't sleep. But we didn't hear a peep out of him. Even the next day, we didn't hear anything. And it wasn't until really years later that we realized that's what had
That was the
occurred.
story.
In a sense, that was my audition.
Yeah, yeah. So that is brought out in the book. And one thing that I've noticed about the book, and I'll tell you this, anybody that knows me in my academic background knows that I'm not a voracious reader. But this book, I picked it up. Now, I should say that the book is available through Amazon.com, but it's available in a whole bunch of different formats. You know, you can get the hardcover, you can get the soft cover, or I choose the fastest delivery, and I got the Kindle version, which I'm able to read either on my phone or on the same computer right here. I really couldn't put it down, and in 2 seatings, I finished the book. It's not a tell-all book. It's not people looking for dirt on Kenny, because the reality is, and you know, we spent many times backstage together. This was not a rock and roll life that you lived backstage. So anybody who's looking for dirt, they've come to the wrong place. But if they're looking for great stories about what took place between shows, this is really the book. And what is the reaction that you're getting from people right now? Because you know what, it's been out for less than a week, and people on the internet are saying that they saw it and are waiting for their copy and waiting for their autographed copy. What's been the initial reaction?
Well, so far, I honestly, when you write a book and you do it, you can't help, or at least I can't help, to be a little self-conscious and wonder whether people will actually enjoy what you've written. And and I've been quite amazed that the comments I've gotten from people like yourself who've been around the business for a long time, but still felt as though it was a great document of the 40 years. And we talked a little bit about how most people see the stage persona of artists and interviews maybe, but don't see at all the backstage or the traveling and the other 20 hours, 22 hours of your life when you're on the
You have
road.
to fill.
Right.
Yeah.
And so far the reaction I've got is, geez, I never knew that stuff went on. I really appreciate you sharing the stories. And I've shared some of these stories on Facebook through the years, and people always seem to really enjoy that and say how much they appreciated me sharing them. So far it's been surprisingly well received. That's for me, I because I'm in it, I think, well, it's not that big a deal.
Right.
But the people really enjoyed it.
The amazing thing that's right on the cover is 40 years with a legend. Okay. Now, did you ever, way back when you were back in Michigan, or when you're hitting the road and you're playing these jazz clubs, and you went. The young musician doesn't stay with anybody for a long time. They kind of move around. So you moved around with some various bands. Did you ever in your lifetime think, I got a 40-year gig. I can get 40 years out of this deal?
Well,
yes,
it's
no?
absolutely mind-blowing, astounding. When I joined the band January 79, I had come out of playing a jazz group, and we worked quite a bit around. It was a successful jazz group, but we didn't work every week. And I only got paid when I worked. So when I came with Kenny and we started working, I got paid every week. And it was like, my wife said, what are we going to do with all this money? It was amazing. It wasn't a tremendous amount of money, but it was every week. And so I thought, well, we ought to save as much as we can, because you don't know how long these things are going to last. And
Certainly not till retirement.
Right, that's right. In my opinion, I thought it would be, I remember reading an article or an interview with Elton John, and this was like in the late 70s, or I think 70s. And he said, artists don't last that long. They're on top for maybe 3 or 4 years tops. And there's a lot of truth to that. If you look at probably the vast majority of artists, that's true. Certainly not true for Elton John. And it certainly turned out to not be true for Kenny Rogers. But at that time, I sort of thought it was going to be 2 or 3 years. I really did. 5 years at the absolute unimaginable length of time. 5.
You were not a good prognosticator of time and career. Let me ask you a further question on that. There was about a 10-year period where Kenny could do nothing wrong and was filling not theaters, but arenas and stadiums, like the Superdome down in New Orleans.
Right.
As you're walking from the dressing room to the round stage, which Kenny kind of pioneered, okay? And there were some stories in the book that you tell about Ray Charles Ray Charles and Ronnie Milsap. 2 guys that have something in common, and they're up on this round stage that's either between 4 and 6 feet wide with a big grand piano. Did you ever look up in the rafters and see as far as the eye could see and pinch yourself and say, is this really happening? Night after night, city after city, show after show, hit after hit.
It's pretty amazing what you said, when he could do no wrong. That's absolutely true. Kenny used to talk about that a little bit. We'd be riding on his plane here, private plane every day, and we're riding in, and he said, the truth is, you're only as good as your last hit.
Show. Yeah.
And he used to say, if I could put out anything and it would become a hit, because I've got the momentum right now. It's sort of like a football team going down that's got the momentum, He had the momentum right then, and no matter what he put out, he would have a hit, but he wouldn't have a hit for the next one necessarily. That's why he always considered you're only as good as your current or last song.
Yep.
So how that relates to what you asked about the arenas, we did over 10 or 12 years from when we played to a minimum of 10, but normally 15 or 20,000 people a night, for over 100 days a year, 150 days a year. If you add that up, the sheer magnitude of that, I don't think that there's another artist that can claim that. Now, there's artists that, Rolling Stones, for instance, that have gone out for many more years, but they only go out every couple years.
Right. They weren't continuous. You guys pretty much were continuous.
Nonstop. And so when you think of 150 shows a year, to say 10 to 20,000 people a night, I mean, it's not hard to say over 40 years that we've performed to over 50 million people live.
Yep.
That's a lot of people.
Yep.
And probably over 5,000 concerts. So part of it becomes routine. And it's another city. I don't care what city it is. It's dressing rooms. It's a team locker room is the same in New Orleans as it is in LA, you know.
However, okay, one thing that I learned from you guys is that you had very good memories of what restaurants were in what cities.
That we always talked about maybe trying to do a culinary book. That
A
would be,
culinary book, right?
you
I
know,
mean,
a touring culinary
because there was
experience.
that pizza shop right near, what was the place in New York? Westbury.
Well, there was one in Westbury,
Yep.
and it was called Fernando's, I think. I might be wrong on that, but it was one where we always went to when we were there at Christmas time, December, and I think you went there with us more than once.
Yep. Yep.
That
Then there was the catering at the North Shore Music Circus.
That was terrific.
Yep.
Shiitake mushrooms, I remember that.
The ravioli, right? The ravioli.
That's right. It was really good. And then, of course, in Buffalo, we always went to the Anchor Bar and
Anchor
Grill
Bar.
where hot wings or buffalo wings originated.
Yep.
And in New Orleans, there were several places that we used to go to, and all over the country there was places that we regularly went to because we would go to those cities every 12 to 18 months.
Yep. Yep.
And so
Yep.
it was fun to revisit them each time.
The other thing that you bring out in the book, on the international tours, there were some culinary adventures there where you may have been eating stuff that you didn't know what you was eating.
Well, that's true. We
Especially
were in
those Far East trips.
we were in Morocco. That was one thing, and had some very unique foods there. To tell you the truth, some of them I don't know what it was. I remember in Korea we went out to eat, and I mean, it's almost hard for me to say with my dog sitting next to me, but they had dog on the menu.
Don't say that loud.
Now I didn't partake in that, but they had it there, and then in other Far East countries, Thailand and in Kuala Lumpur and Jakarta there, and there was all kinds of unique foods. I remember we were on a tour, I think it was '89, and we did a Southeast Asia tour that included Japan, Korea, Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, Thailand, etc. And Singapore, I remember. And Singapore was one of the last dates on the tour. And we got there, and somebody said, I heard that there was a Hard Rock cafe here in Singapore. And so they said, yeah, there is. So could we go there? Because after eating all Asian food for that 2 weeks or 3 weeks,
Needed a
all
burger.
everybody wanted was a burger, and
Burger.
in my case, a chicken sandwich.
Chicken
And
sandwich.
so we went there and had that.
You know what? That it's amazing. All the stories. Now that we're start talking, then I realize we're already out of time on this segment for this interview, because I have figured out over years of doing these YouTube videos that the audience, there's a time that they can understand, then there's a time where they kind of listen and then don't listen, but et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to ask if you will come back at another time to tell us a few more stories, such as some of the opening acts that you
Right.
worked with, some of the lifetime friendships that you've developed, some of the people in other bands that you developed friendships with, stories that are all great stories in themselves that are included in the book, but we can't really talk about now because of the time frame. I know that the overriding theme of this book is that Kenny was a great person to work with. Would you agree with me on that?
Well, I've stated in the book and elsewhere that one of the great things about Kenny was that he was consistent. He made a rule on January 1st, and it was the same on April 1st. And that's so often when you work with artists, they can be fickle and change their mind. I worked with one artist that said, oh, well, you have to be on the bus at 9 a.m. And we'd all be sitting there at 9 a.m. and he would come out about 10:30.
Yeah.
And it was kind of frustrating when that would happen. So the consistency was a big deal. He knew how to be a boss,
Yep.
but a very effective boss and magnanimous. He was a great guy.
So the other thing, and you just alluded to it, but we're not going to talk about it now. This is called the tease for the next segment. You said being at a certain place at a certain time to get on the bus, and Jerry Seinfeld did not get to a certain place at
I
a
think I
certain
covered
time.
that in the book, didn't I? Yeah.
And that is in the book, and we want to get to that next time. But first, we want to tell you that you are listening to our friend Chuck Jacobs, who's the author of the book that's just released. You can get it on Amazon. In fact, you can go right down below and make it easy for you. There's a link right down below in the descriptions, and either have it sent to you via Kindle or a hard copy or a
Paperback.
softcover copy.
And yeah, right. I should mention, if you do want an autographed copy,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
you can go to 40yearswiththelegend.net or .com.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Yep.
And you can order the book directly from there, and then we'll sign it and send it out to you.
There we go. So Chuck, will you promise me on camera that you'll be back for another version of this?
I love it, and it's been a lot of fun. And as normal, these things go by so quickly. It's amazing.
Yeah, and let's tell our viewers there, if you have a specific question to Chuck, okay, just write it down in the comments here, and we will watch those and monitor those and send them along to Chuck, so we'll be able to ask them next time. We'll even tell the people who asked the question, so
That'd
you
be
can
great.
be part of the show the next time. And we want to let you know that buy that book. It's, Chuck, give us the exact title.
It's 40 Years with the Legend, and that's the stories and adventures through the years with Kenny.
Okay, we'll be back at another time. Hope you enjoy this. In the meantime,
Thank you, John.
let's go out with a blaze of glory.
That's right.